production, or not production, over trade. Yeah, over trade and trying to explain the basic mechanics of trade, what makes good trade nodes, and why they make good trade nodes, what makes bad trade nodes, and really kind of the differences between like like a little bit upstream, downstream is very simple to understand, but this is my general goal right now. I may deviate from it. So yeah, essentially you have the very basics of trade. You have your main trading port, which is where you will always collect trade, no matter if you have a merchant to collect trade there or not. All the trade that you have will automatically try to get pushed there towards your trade node. The only way it gets influenced is, the only way it generally only gets influenced is by another nation pulling trade towards that channel, or pulling trade towards your, or towards a different, okay, that's, I'll get to that later. So you have three nodes: Genoa, Venice, and the English Channel. Venice is the weaker of the two. Genoa and the English Channel are very debated for which is the better of the two. I personally was a fan of Genoa, thinking Genoa was the better trade node to go for. Upon further review, I honestly think it may be the English Channel, because the more I've kind of looked into and the more I've thought about it, the more I've kind of realized you can direct, you should be able to direct, I think, almost if not every trade node in the game to the English Channel. I used to think that you would not be able to do that for any trade node ever. Like any in trade node, I didn't think you could do that. The more I've thought about it, you could do that for Genoa, or not Genoa, but for the English Channel. The exceptions being Venice and Genoa itself. So that's the very starting basics. You gain merchants throughout the game. You start off with 2, and that the more merchants you can get more merchants through either your ideas, for instance the trade idea group, you get merchants, you can get an additional merchant through, or you can have, for instance, national ideas, such as Hormuz starts off with a +1 merchant off the bat. If you were to go into the idea groups, you can see trade, you get +1 merchant there, +1 merchant there. Expansion, you get +1 merchant. And the other way you get merchants has been added relatively recently. That is, if you get a colonial nation that gains, via colonial nation that has 10 or more cities, aka colonies that have been fully developed, colonies that have been fully finished. So you start a colony, and instead of seeing the thing down there that a colonist is working on building this colony, you wouldn't have this view. I believe let's see here. I do have colonists actually. So you can see here I have uncolonized land, and you can see here I have a guy building a colony. This is a colony. This is a city. That's the easiest breakdown of it that I can give. And whenever a colonial nation gets 10 cities, you get a merchant. And Western nations get the ability to make trade companies, which you can see normally through there, but since I own the entire world, that makes it a little different. So you can see here, you get the ability to add or move this to a trade company. And your trade company, so long as they own 50% or more of the trade power in a node, they will give you a merchant. And what merchants are able to do, as have touched on, you can send them to collect from a node that is either your home node or any node in the game they can collect from. Or you can use them to transfer trade power towards whichever direction that node can flow into. For instance, Ragusa, you're able to send a merchant to transfer trade to Vienne, Venice, or Genoa. If you do not have a merchant there, then you don't get that direct control. So your interest will be to try to direct trade towards, in my case, Genoa, since that's my main trade node. But if there are other nations around, you'd be able to see the flags down there, and if you click into the trade node like I did, which you can do that through this stuff, just by straight up clicking it, you can see that you'll see all the different countries, what their trade powers are, and how they're using it, and you'll see here if they have a merchant or not. A merchant will give +2 trade power towards a node, which, and then like I said, it also lets you manually assign where it's going. Your total trade power of a node, or the total trade power of a node, you can see here. Total trade power, you can see I've got 2.0 from a merchant presence. From provinces, I get from the Ragusa, all the Ragusan provinces add 137.8 trade power to this node, and because I have a lot of merchants, it's increasing that even more so. Trade ships will also increase your trade power in a node, more so that you will not get from provincial, because you have province trade multiplier, you have province trade modifiers, and you have your trade modifiers themselves, or and non-provincial trade modifiers, the easier way to say that. So your local trade modifiers are your provincial ones, which gives you your local trade modifiers gives you the base that this node will produce in trade. What I'm saying for that is, if you go into a province, you'll see down here in the trade section how much trade power this is giving, as well as what's influencing that trade power. You can see Roxa is giving me, from having 6 development, it gives me 1.2 trade power in the Ragusa trade node, and that is from its total development. That's from its development, and then I get the 2.1 because my mercantilism grants me plus 75% local provincial trade modifier, which, short and sweet of it, it gives you a bonus to that province, to all of your provinces' trade power. Mercantilism does not have a downside as far as I'm aware. Trade value of the node, you will see being my value of trade goods from grain. Grain is worth 2 ducats, and this province only produces 0.47 grain per year. So the trade value of that this province adds to Ragusa is 0.95 per year. You divide that by 12 to figure out your monthly trade value added to that trade node from that province. And your goods produced, you have a base production modifier, which will be from your production itself, as well, which will be from the production itself, and I think that's the only thing that should I believe that's the only thing that actually gives you local goods produced base modifier, and then you gain, yeah, so that is, so you'll see here, local goods produced from this province is 0.2 from having 2 development. If I were to raise this to 3, it would take, I believe it should take, I believe if I were to let this go from a month, it would increase the local goods produced. Actually, a quicker way to see that is, so from 2, I go here, and it does not. I could have sworn that increasing this would increase your local goods produced. But yeah, regardless or not, I'm not able to actually experiment with that to show that in this video from this playthrough. So you'll see your goods produced, you have the base production. Okay, that's what production, it does modify it by 0.2. With each, I'm blind. Each level gives you 0.2 local goods produced and local ship building time of -1%. So Raska goes from 2 to 3, it goes from producing 0.4 local goods produced to 0.6, gives me a base production of 0.6 grain produced per year, and my trade will not have gone, this stuff will not have been touched at all because it's calculated on the 1st of every month. Your base production, you'll see the goods produced, then you get modifiers, which are modifiers that only increase your production, your local goods produced modifier. There we go. So if you go into your ideas, one good example is administrative, goods produced modifier, plus 10%. All of your goods produced are going to be plus 10% from this modifier. But then there's also a modifier out there called production efficiency that only impacts your production income. It does not impact trade, because even though you're producing, you're more efficient with producing your products. You're more efficient in producing your trade good with production efficiency, and that's straight up your production. That does not double dip into trade. However, your production is influenced by your production and your goods produced modifier for trade are both impacted by that goods produced modifier. It's why goods produced is better than production efficiency. It's why manufactories are very good, because manufactories gives you straight up +1 local goods produced. That is the highest goods produced modifier, as far as I'm aware, in the game for any province. I believe there are some select ones that are a little bit higher. But so I think that should cover. No, I haven't gone to downstream or upstream. So essentially, the easiest way to explain downstream and upstream is, let's go into Genoa. Genoa has, actually let's not do an end node. So Tunis. Tunis can feed into Sevilla or Genoa, which means Sevilla and Genoa are both upstream of Tunis. That means Sevillan trade and Genoan trade cannot go into the Tunis. These two trade nodes will never go into Tunis itself, because upstream trade cannot be redirected to go into a downstream trade node. However, Katsina is downstream of Tunis, which means the Katsina trade node can feed into Tunis, and anything that Katsina flows into, Katsina is a starting trade node, which means that nothing goes into the Katsina trade node everything, the only thing that the Katsina trade node is modified by is from wherever's produced locally in this single trade region. And then Tunis, Tunis gets the trade power benefit from Katsina depending on how much trade power you have over Katsina if you were to collect in Tunis, or a node downstream of Tunis, or upstream of Tunis. So, for instance, this case, again, since I own the entire world in this run, just so I could make sure I had a vision of everything. That's why I did this. I'm not very competent with console commands. It's not going to be hard for me to look that stuff up, but this is just a lot easier for me to use rather than trying to figure everything out. So you can see I have 100% trade power in Genoa. This is because I have all the provinces in the Genoa trade node. When you calculate all of the trade powers, add every province that's in Genoa trade node together, their trade value or trade power, it comes out to be 545 trade power. I gain +5 from having my main trade city in this area, and I believe that gets taken away, or there's a malus to it if you were to collect elsewhere. Again, because of the monthly tick, I'm not going to be able to prove that in this video. But it's either through there or it affects your trade efficiency, one or the other. And then I get a 2.6 modifier due to having 196% trade power modifier in this node. The trade power modifier is going to be because I have, it's going to be mercantilism is going to impact this by, I believe, 75%. That 75% of that 196 is from mercantilism. And then you've got my, trying to think what else would impact that for the percentage wise, because I believe it's going to be, I believe the trade power impacts are going to be your mercantilism plus your trade efficiency plus centers of trade, which will have its own impact on trade power modifier that honestly I'm not 100% sure on. It's not a very clear system, and yeah. So if you go into the incoming trade node, if you go into the trade node, you're able to see what trade is incoming into Genoa from elsewhere, from its feeder node, its downstream nodes, also known as feeder nodes. I use the terms interchangeably. So you'll see that I get 542 ducats per month added to the Genoa trade node from the downstream nodes, and it breaks it down into where exactly it's coming from, things on those lines. The added value modifier, I am unsure what that is. If I had to guess, let's see here. That could very well just be because I have merchants there, because Alexandria, Ragusa, Sevilla, Champagne, and Tunis. So Ragusa, Champagne, Alexandria, I know all three of those have a merchant. Sevilla does not, and yeah. So the incoming, the add value straight up. This is showing how much your merchant is adding value to your trade power in this node. Or yeah, trade value, not power. Your incoming trade value from the downstream nodes directly going into Genoa, what your merchant adds onto it. It also then tells you how much each province adds per month, the trade value that's going into this trade node per month from all the provinces added on, and it breaks it down, shows you how much monthly, and also does thankfully show you the yearly value as well if you're interested, but more importantly you want to look at the monthly. This shows you how much is flowing out of the node through outgoing trade, and then shows you how much trade value is in this node by itself. So from the direct downstream nodes and the local modifiers, this node has a trade value of 566 ducats, 0.47, but we're just going to round there. If I were to collect from trade, that should increase this total by 10% if I were to send a merchant there. For the most part, there are some situations that's not something that you're really going to want to do. In this situation, probably better for me to have a merchant collecting there. But I earn 400. So yeah, the total value of this trade node is 566.47 ducats a month. I earn 849.71 ducats here. Well, how's that possible if the total trade value is about 300 less? Well, we can see here, if we look here, we can see that this right here is showing my trade power share. That's showing my income, which I thought that was my trade power share. Okay, there we go. That's what I was looking for. So you can see the income modifier I have. Well, I have 40% from technology, 10% gain from trade agreements, 10% gain from my trade efficiency advisor, and minus 10% from the Smugglers Dominating event. So, and the reason why I'm telling you that's my advisor is because, well, you can go up here, government, Taru Shimabaku, trade efficiency plus 10% advisor. So, go there, and the signed trade agreements is either through an event or an idea. It's one of my national ideas for trade efficiency. Trade steering. What trade steering does, that 0.20%, basically will just give you a 20% modifier to when you're trying to trade, when you're trying to steer trade into a node. And that matters when you have competing powers for that node, or other people who want to pull away from that node. Because I don't have trade ideas, I'm not ahead of time in diplomatic technology, don't really have any other trade modifiers right now, or trade efficiency modifiers right now. But yeah, trade efficiency will directly increase your trade income. And that's 50% of 566.47 plus the total value itself. And that should, if you do the math, get you up to 849.71 per month. And again, we can just do don't have a calculator pulled up on my PC, but I will do the quick math off my phone. 566.47 times 1.5 equals 849.705. Rounds up, 849.71. That checks out. So, trade efficiency is very, very good because it just straight up increases your total trade value, which increases your trade income. So you can see here, well, okay, well, Glad, you're telling me here, this is telling me I'm earning 849.71 ducats from this trade node. But what? This is telling me my trade income is 10,076.30. We go into the economy, and what do you know? That does in fact tell me that's how much money I'm making from Genoa. Well, where's that difference? Why is this 200 ducats more per month? Why is that 200 ducats more per month than what you just showed me. You just detailed all this stuff. What's going on? Well, to be quite honest with you, I have no idea. If I had to guess, but you're not here for guesses. Logically speaking, I'm thinking it's going to be due to a multiplier that you gain from having. Well, the thing is, I'm sitting there thinking it's got to be due to the merchants I have downstream, because this only accounts for the total that's coming in and shows you my incoming and how much value is added per merchant. Directly feed into this. So, okay, that's nice. But if we go here, we can see that I get another 14.56 value added from this merchant. That's just straight up added money that's not normally going to be in that trade, in that province. Your merchant is a god who makes provincial local goods and all that stuff. Well, no, he's a god who makes your trade value increase and gives you more trade money than what the node can actually do itself, even if you own 100% of it. And logically speaking, pretty sure if I were to go to each one and see, okay, well, each merchant I have adds trade value to a node, and so long as those nodes feed into Genoa, that should add up to be the missing 200-ish ducats. Not 100% positive on that. Logically speaking, this will make sense to me. And again, just from kind of how I know how the game works, that's honestly probably what it is. And you can see here your trade power modifier in Genoa. You can see plus 5% are from technology. Power production gives me another 20%. Prestige 15%. Stability being at 1 only gives me 1%, and probably will give me more if I were to have. Probably gives me 1% per level of stability. And I think I may be able to check that. Yeah, global trade power I think only goes up by +1. Not 100% positive, but that's what I'm kind of thinking it is. And so every single merchant gives me plus 10% trade power towards Genoa. If I go to Ragusa, well, what do you know? None of my merchants give me that extra trade power. So that's where you really kind of get into the difference between collecting and transferring. If you collect from a different node, I believe you lose every single merchant's trade power plus 10% for your home node. If you collect from your own node, you lose 10% trade power from everything else, but you gain 10% of the total earnings. So you have to debate, so you really have to go down to the math and see, well, this trade power gives me 196%. If I were to drop a merchant that feeds into the Genoan trade node, because I believe that should, no, actually, no, that's right, transfer from, it doesn't matter if it actually feeds in the trade node or not. So if I were to have Ragusa as my main trade node and have a merchant transferring in Venice, then I would gain 10% modifier in Ragusa, even though the trade will never get to Ragusa from Venice. But I get plus 10% modifier on the trade power in that node from that merchant. So you have to really, that's where you go down to math and it gets very, very gritty, and you have to determine how that's going to go. So yeah, I think that's the very basics of trade from at least kind of the first part I want to discuss. The next part I want to discuss is showing what makes a good trade node. And before there is one very basic concept I have not gone into right now. You have inland trade nodes and you have sea coastal trade nodes. Well, The reason why trade has always done better for the most part over sea is because you're able to travel from Hangzhou all the way over to Genoa by ship. And, well, it's frankly a lot easier and faster to do that. Whereas if you're going to go from Chengdu and try to go straight through land routes, you go from Chengdu to Xi'an, Yumen, to Samarkand, to Astrakhan, to Crimea, which again, you get into, right there you get into, well, that's a coastal trade node. So you're really just kind of, that's probably a little bit more realistic than it is a game mechanic. The way the game mechanics really work for it is you have inland trade nodes are dominated by caravan power because you cannot send ships and inland trade nodes to increase your trade power. I'm not even exactly sure if I even have trade ships going at this point, just because I got very lazy near the end of my campaign here. So I do. So these guys are protecting my interest in Bengal. If I were to go to my interest in Bengal, I should have trade power from light ships, 105. So this is straight up, there's a provincial trade power of 278.6, and my light ships here increase my local trade power by 105. My current trade power in this node is 4.4, and that's going to be a lot of math to show very little. Basically, the very short thing about trade ships is that if you do not have a majority of trade power in a node, so if I were to have 50% or lower, no, I take that back, so that's not the way it works. The way it works is that if any other country in the game had more trade power in the Bengal trade node than I did, light ships would give me a bonus to getting more trade power into that node to be able to direct trade more where I want to go, or to be able to, yeah, that's the general gist of it. It would be able to help me extract more trade power out of this node to go towards Ceylon if I wanted it to, because Ceylon would be, if Ceylon was an interest where I wanted to go, because I have full trade power in Ceylon, but not Bengal. Trade ships, from my knowledge, you really don't have to worry about trade ships once you own a majority of the node, and if you own the majority of one of these nodes, or no, I take that back. You don't have to worry about trade ships once you own an entirety of a node and you have no competitors for that node. So, for instance, Bengal, if you own all of Bengal, then once you own all of Ceylon, trade ship won't really help you out with Bengal, because Bengal will not be able to direct more trade power towards Ceylon from trade ships, because your trade ships don't give you that extra income. I do hope that makes sense, because trade ships do not directly increase your trade value in node. It just increases your power and being able to take that trade and put it somewhere else, or to be able to increase your local power within the node if that is your collecting node, so you're able to keep more of the trade in it locally. Again, I'm hoping that does make sense, just because that is a little bit more complicated, but it's a key part of trade, really understanding it. And that leads me into what makes a good trade node. Well, good trade node generally is one that you have either an end node, so there is never a trade node that could potentially siphon income off from this, that will siphon income off of this, or one that only has one trade node that it goes into. The reason for that one is because, for instance, if you own Bengal as your main trade node, and you have 100% of the Ceylon trade power, then Bengal will never have income siphoned towards Ceylon to go out further west. That's the very short of it. There's a lot more that goes into it, but the short and sweet, that's what makes a good trade node. What makes a bad trade node is something like Ragusa, where you have only one trade node that goes into it, but it feeds into 3 different directions, so you have to be able to halt the trade leaving Ragusa by having complete influence over Vienne, Venice, and Genoa. And it also makes it a bit bad because, well, Venice and Genoa are both much better trade nodes than Ragusa, and I believe even Vienne is. But that's kind of, I mean, I say Vienne's a better trade node. Vienne's a little bit of a better trade node than Ragusa, but the Ragusa's got argument for being better because it's still be influenced by light ships. So, yeah, that's very, very simply done. To go into inland and coastal modifiers, which I was going on to, well, Catan, as you can see, is a coastal trade node because, well, if you look at it, it's A, visually located on the coast here, and B, a coastal trade node is any trade node that has any sea province. And so, but if you look at this, look, it's got several of inland trade provinces. Yes, but it all ultimately feeds into the Catan trade node. Light ships can increase the trade power that you gain here, so caravan power is useful for these inland provinces of Canton, but generally for coastal provinces, all the centers of trades are on the coast, and your caravan power is really not that good here for those kinds of results, or because for those reasons. Chengdu, on the other hand, not a single one is touching the sea, and the Caspian Sea does not count as a sea in this game. Neither does the Aral Sea or really any of these inland lakes, because the only thing that counts as a coastal sea trade node is one that touches any of the seas that ultimately connect. So inland trade routes are the ones that are very influenced by caravan power, which caravan power is essentially the same thing for you as light ships. They increase your trade power within a node. Oh, that's kind of funny. I never actually noticed the cobwebs there. So yeah, so caravan power is something. There's ideas that influence it, but not much else in the game. If anything else will influence caravan power, some ideas and maybe some events. Excuse me. And caravan power is useful if you have a lot of land trade. So inland trade nodes generally are going to be worse than your sea trade nodes. I say generally because, well, there's always exceptions. What you have when it comes to these inland trade nodes, well, yeah, for instance, Novgorod, which is a very solid trade node, coastal, comes down to it. Well, you can direct, if you don't have Novgorod is fed by 2 inland trade nodes. So the caravan power on those areas, like Novgorod is, trying to think of the words for it. Novgorod, even though it's on the coast, it's very influenced by caravan power, because to gain better trade, to be able to get better trade from your local competitors, you're going to need to have that caravan power if you have any other competing powers in that trade node for Novgorod trade. And well, inland trade to get to Novgorod Novgorod's a very solid node, because if you look, you have the White Sea and the Baltic Sea, which is not the most ideal out there. White Sea is good. White Sea honestly is pretty good, because even though it's considered a very, very bad node, White Sea's pretty good so long as you don't feed too much into the North Sea, or really any at all, because you only have one that feeds in there and you get all the Novgorod trade, and it's one upstream from Novgorod. Well, Novgorod is able to go into, is fed into Kiev, and by Kiev and Kazan. Well, Kazan is straight inland, and Kazan gets fed by Astrakhan and Siberia, which are both inland. And Siberia gets fed by Girin, which is coastal, and is a lot of the eastern trade. Well, kind of an eastern trade. You get the California trade net. You get California trade, and Giron feeds into Beijing, Nippon, and Siberia. Well, okay, so there's one route for Kazan. The other one is through Astrakhan. Astrakhan, you get it gets fed into by Samarkand, which gets fed into by Siberia, Yumen, Kashmir, Indus, and can feed into either Persia or Astrakhan. These are the trade nodes that feed into Samarkand. These are the trade nodes that Samarkand feeds into. That's the simplest way to explain that stuff. And if you notice, Siberia, Yumen, Kashmir, the Indus. Indus is coastal, but Kashmir and Yumen and Siberia are all going to be inland trade nodes. Excuse me. And Samarkand is really the first big inland trade node. It is very, very good when it comes to Indian trade, because you're able to, if you have very strong influence in Samarkand, Astrakhan, and Kazan and Novgorod, or Astrakhan, Crimea, Kiev, and Novgorod, then Samarkand is going to be your way to get all of the riches of India, Asia proper, I guess Asia proper to an extent. All that you can feed into Samarkand, and that's how you're able to get even further west through inland trades. You do not need to own the Gulf of Aden, don't need to own you don't need to own the Gulf of Aden, Zanzibar, all the African trade nodes. You can direct all of this up through the Indus into Samarkand, go all overland to Novgorod. The way you really determine if inland or sea trade is going to be better for you really depends on what kind of empire you have. Your typical Russian empires are going to be very inland-based trade, because you're generally not going to have a lot of control over the Gulf of Aden, Zanzibar, all that stuff, unless you're going to go for war conquest. Typical Russian playthrough, you will be able to have a lot of influence in the Chinese, Indian, and really the Eastern trade, but not so much from Africa, and the African trade would flow into the Mediterranean, and you would be screwed, basically. Samarkand and the Gulf of Aden is really kind of where you have the first big division between land or sea trade, depending on your empire, because the Indus feeds into both. And well, and so really the Indus is the critical node to determine if you have a very Russian empire own all this northern stuff and you want to benefit the trade, well, you have to control the Indus and you have to control Samarkand. Ideally, you would have these down here, just because that way in order to guarantee all that trades can go into the Indus, because the Gulf of Aden is a very greedy node and takes from all three major Indian trades. If you, you really want to own all three, but if you own the Indus, you can generally pull enough power up there to get a lot of this coastal Indian trade inland up to Russia. And that would be where trade ships would be very powerful, because you'd be able to use merchants and trade ships to increase your trade power, to dictate more trade power going to the Indus, to go inland instead of going to the Gulf of Aden towards the Europeans, or the Western Europeans. And yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into trade, as I know I have mentioned quite a bit. Hormuz is not a bad trade node at all, because you only feed into Basra, and you get the Gulf of India and the Indus feeding into you, which Gulf of Aden and the Indus feeding into you, which really can set you up for getting quite a bit of trade, so long as you use your influence wisely. Basra is also good to an extent. Oh, it's decent. It's not as good as Hormuz because you have to be able to project your influence into Aleppo and Persia to stop trade leaking out, and that's kind of hard to do if you're not blobbing. And if you don't have a European port, the Aleppo one is pretty much impossible to stop with. Yeah. Excuse me. So I believe that should cover the very basics of trade. If you've got questions or anything along those lines, then you're going to, yeah, that's a little icon, that's kind of cool. That will tell you that this is an inland trade node. And that's for all the inland trade nodes. There's a lot of helpful things in this game for that, but if you got any questions or anything I didn't cover in this video, feel free to ask in the comments. I will answer the comments, and if there's enough uncertainty because I did not explain things very well, I will make another video based off the feedback I get with comments. Thank you for watching. Yeah, thank you for watching. I do produce a lot of content. Really, I've been producing more so just streamed and video dumps to an extent of my streams, doing my campaigns, getting involved more in multiplayer. I think I'm doing 2 multiplayer sessions a week now. You see, both right now are hosted by Prince Ali, and it's a big Reddit thing. It's pretty fun. I am doing Aragon for used to be Saturday, now it's been transferred to Sunday. There's a new one coming up on Saturday, I believe starting this Saturday, and I will be starting off as the Timurids. So if you have any interest in those, feel free to come watch on those. Feel free to come watch. I will be streaming them and uploading the videos to my YouTube channel. Past broadcasts are available here on Twitch. I also do a lot of single player. Right now, my current campaign is a Straight Talk, starting off as Hormuz, going the Straight Talk achievement, then finally picking up This is Persia, with a decent amount of hard limits to myself to make it more entertaining and more challenging for myself. Again, if you're interested in any of that stuff, and I'm going to be producing more campaigns, more content videos. I want to get back to the community, and I really want to help people understand EU4, so that you're not like me initially, where I started playing EU4, had no idea what was going on, couldn't find anything all that helpful video-wise, and quit for several months. Even though I had friends that played the game, they really weren't that helpful in helping me figure stuff out. Then came back to the game and watched DDR Jake's 1.7 Three Mountains run, I learned a lot of the game mechanics from that run, and DDR Jake is someone I fully endorse, fully support. Really helps me learn, really helped me learn the game, and still helps me learn new things. There is not a single player in this game that understands everything about the game. The closest is honestly probably Wiz, because he understands the AI and a lot of things that go into the game. And he's probably the person who knows the most about the game out there. But he's a developer, isn't going to be making a whole lot of content outside the develop multiplayers, and we'll do some interview stuff, but he's not going to be someone that does Twitch, does YouTube, does Let's Plays and all that stuff, because he's got a very busy job himself. DDR Jake does a lot. Marco Antonio is very good at this game, probably the best EU4 player out there. Atwix, ATWIX on Paradox Plaza, the forums for Paradox games, does a lot of really good AARs. I learned a lot, and he also did some decent write-ups, such as like the PU write-up and mechanics. Atwix and DRJ are the ones who have really learned a lot of the mechanics of the game from initially so I can understand them, so I could be able to produce content through this and do one tag Ryuku. E4 is a very fun game, and I want to help build up the community, get people interested in the game, get people better at the game, and honestly, just people to enjoy the game more, so there's not these confusing mechanics that people don't understand. They create very ranty posts about things they don't understand, and stuff could be working as intended, but they're like, oh, this is terrible because I don't understand it, when in reality, it's actually pretty good. So yeah, again, my name is Glod. We'll have a lot of content coming out. Still producing content quite a bit, and yeah. If you guys like this video, again, feel free to throw a comment, throw down a like, whatever, on YouTube, on Twitch. You're doing through past broadcast. If you catch me live, feel free to say whatever you want and channel about this, but really, YouTube comments are the best way to. YouTube comments or messaging me over Twitch PMs are going to be the best way to give me feedback about the stuff and what kind of stuff you guys want to see going forward. This ended up lasting a little bit longer than I was planning to, for both the explanation and my rambles at the end. So if you've made it this far, congratulations. I really do hope you guys understand trade better, because again, I know it's a very difficult game mechanic, and I very lightly touched some of the more complex stuff. But yep.